Welcome to the EMS Wizard Podcast. And today, joining my best friend and Walter, we also have Dr. Brent Myers, the Chief Medical Welcome to the EMS Wizard Podcast. I'm your host, Terrence Sheehy, and joining my best friends, John and Walter, we've got Dr. Brent Myers, the Chief Medical Officer for ESO. Dr. Myers, welcome to this episode.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Well, I will have to say I appreciate it that you would come with us on the episode. I know you're a hard man to track down since you spend time back and forth between North Carolina and Texas?
Yeah. The home office is in Austin, but I'm all over the place, man. Delta stock relies on me to fly.
No doubt. No doubt. Well,
I just want your points.
Yes.
Yeah, those do come in handy every so often, I must say.
Well, Joe Zalkin would probably want your points as well, but I don't know. Maybe he's maxed on his.
Oh, no. Now, Joseph, let's just be real clear. Joseph pays cash to sit in the front of the plane. He doesn't need any points. It doesn't make any difference.
Wow. Well, there's a ton of stuff that I think people would be interested to know. I mean, you're a North Carolina legend, but before we get into some of that, I'd like to start off. I think one of the things that set us off is like, how does someone, and you're a native North Carolinian, and, tell us about that, how, born and raised where, and how you got to, stair stepping. We're probably going to interrupt you and ask questions and stuff because it's just how we roll.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, feel free to. So, yeah, I am a native North Carolinian. I was born in Wilkesboro. Well, technically North Wilkesboro, because that's where the hospital is.
Gotcha.
For those of you that don't know the politics up there, there's a river that runs between the two towns, and 85% of the registered voters in Wilkesboro are Republican, and 85% of the registered voters in North Wilkesboro are Democrat. And that's why the towns don't ever become one, because they could never get that sorted out. So I was born and raised up there, and when I turned 16, my dad sat down and said, "Listen, well, I'll help you buy a car, but you need to learn, kind of go get a job and earn some of your own money to help, understand the value of a dollar and all that. We're not just going to give you stuff." And the hospital had a non-skilled orderly position, right? Change the sheets, change the bedpans, move patients around, kind of thing. And they paid on the Baylor plan. And for those who don't know what that is, you could work 24, work 2 12s on the weekends and get paid for 40 hours. So for a high school kid that didn't need to sleep, that worked out fine. You could go out and see friends on Friday and Saturday night, work 2 12s on Saturday and Sunday, and take home 40 hours worth of pay. Now,
I remember them days.
Yeah. Being a 16-year-old, changing bedpans and sheets lost its glamour pretty quick. And there was a charge nurse there by the name of Geraldine McCall. She had been working in that emergency department at Wilkes Regional Medical Center for 30 years. And she took me out on the ambulance dock one day and she said, "Look, if you will stay here for a month, you will always want to work in this profession." And what I've told people is at that little job, if I'd been with a plumber, I'd be a plumber. Somebody that enthusiastic 3 decades in, it's contagious. Right. So she said, "Now, when you so I got in Chapel Hill not long after that. And she said, I'm going to get you into an EMT class at the North Orange Rescue Squad." She knew somebody that, so when you go to college, you need to take your EMT course, and then on down the path it went from there. So it all started from standing on the ambulance dock with Geraldine McCall at that Wilkes Regional Medical Center when I was 16 years old.
And you took EMT? Yeah,
I took the EMT course upstairs at the Orange County Rescue Squad in Hillsboro.
I know exactly where you're talking about. I mean, they don't exist anymore, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep. And then I went on to become the crew chief for the North Orange. There were 6 shifts in those days because it was all volunteer.
Yeah.
So, I had every Wednesday night and every other weekend. I can't remember exactly how the schedule worked, but it was something like that. There was one night a week that you had the same night every week, so you could kind of plan. And then every so often you pick up weekend days or what have you. And so, from there, when I went to medical school at Wake Forest, I was one of the few, I guess, that walked in and said, I'm going to do emergency medicine, and ended up doing that on the other side. And there was some weeble wobbling in between. I really like neurosurgery. I really hate plastic surgery. I realized that OB wasn't for me. Internal medicine was a little boring. Went through the whole thing, but ended up kind of, where I started, so to speak. And Roy and that whole gang was there, during all that. And then went to residency at what was then Carolinas, and is now, I guess, Advocate Atrium Carolinas Medical Center, whatever the name, they keep swapping names around, but and that was just a fantastic experience because the volume there was great. Tom Black was a medical director, really got to know the guys at Medic and ride along with them. And it was good because that EMT background, when I was working in the emergency department, I could kind of understand where they were coming from. And we had a really good rapport with a lot of the different providers with Medic, which was a good part of that education. And then you'll kind of get a theme. I went to NMSP, which is National Association of EMS Physicians. Tom encouraged me to go. And there was a billboard on the wall that, and I'll show my age. In those days, there was literally a board with pins in it with all the different opportunities that were available out in the hallway. There was no electronic version of that. And Jane Bryce at Chapel Hill put up there that she was going to start an EMS fellowship. And if you took the fellowship, they would pay for your master's at Chapel Hill in public health as part of the fellowship time. So I sat down and talked with her and became the first fellow at Chapel Hill. And then that rotated over with Wake County as part of that fellowship. Yeah. And, whilst you were there, one thing led to another. And Donald Vaughn, who was a medical director there for a long time, had been looking to retire and wanted to hand over the reins. And we hit it off, and he worked it out. And then Joseph Zalkin, actually, speaking of, is the one that kind of worked it through the county commission to get that done. So, I owe a lot of the opportunity that Wake County presented from Joseph and Dr. Vaughn seeing me as a fellow and giving me a shot.
Yeah. And I mean, Orange County, they had that. You came through, probably had that system there where they had the immediate response medic that would go out and sort of evaluate folks. And I think Wake made an iteration of that called the APPs or something like that. Were you involved with, did you see that a lot while you were in Orange County, or is that something that, you got exposed to in Wake?
So they did have, it was the really, really early version. It wasn't technically called that. It was still just a chase medic, but that's kind of the role that they played. And I think part of the education out there was, there were 2 BLS ambulances and a medic on the north side, and then there were a couple on the south side, but, their transport times were awfully quick out of Carver and Chapel Hill. Yeah. And so there were many times that the medic was on the other call, and it was, you and another basic with a long haul to anywhere. And so it taught you a little bit of patience and how to be calm in the face of, some interesting times. There was an opportunity while I was at Chapel Hill where I did a public safety summer as a rotation. And that was actually in Seattle, and I was assigned to the Seattle Police Department. But while I was out there, one of the radiologists from the hospital in Wilkesboro had trained out there and knew Mike Kopus, who was the famous medical director of Seattle Medic One. So he sent him a letter. And so I worked all day with the police department and all night with Medic during that summer rotation out there. And they have it's not exactly the same, but they've got this notion of you limit the number of paramedics to the number of high acuity calls. And you worry about the first response getting your time critical, defibrillations and EpiPens and stuff like that. So that whole notion of paramedics having experience versus paramedics being there fast, saw that in Orange County, clearly saw that in Seattle, and that's a lot of what led to the system design that Wake had.
Oh yeah.
So how long were you at Wake? And then the way that I understand it is, and I use the term made kind of a leap of faith or jump, but from Wake to ESO, can you lead us down that path a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I was there a total of 12 and a half years. And when I first came to Wake, it was a relatively small place compared to even what's happened now. There was that rapid growth had really just started in Raleigh, and each of the independent communities had their own EMS agency. So Knightdale had one, Wendell had one, Zebulon had one, et cetera. And when they were formed, that made all the sense in the world because there was lots of space and time between Raleigh and them, right? As time went on, that did not tend to make as much sense. So over time, one or more of those agencies either would call us and say, it's time, we want to join the county, or there would be some issue and the county commission would come in. So I was there as the medical director only for about 6 of those years. And then the second 6 of those years, the county manager asked me to not only be the medical director, but also to be the administrative director of the system.
Oh, wow.
So I got some experience in setting the budgets and, doing all of those things that would not be the traditional medical director role. With every one of those comes an opportunity. And so I reached out to Chris Dilly, who's the CEO at ESO. I said, look, I'm in between things. You'd mentioned consulting years ago. We hadn't really got back around to it. What do you think? He's like, we'll write a year consultancy and let you kind of, sort out what you want to do. I said, that's fine. We'll do that. And so I started piddling around with them for a little bit. And about 6 months in, Chris called me and said, well, legally, we've got to make you a full-time employee because you're past your contract and stuff. And we want to do it anyway, so he was kind of tongue in cheek with that. And that was now 7.5 years ago, which seems like it was yesterday. But that has been one of the greatest opportunities, and it's, I guess the way I think about it when I look back on all of this is, the old nothing venture, nothing gain, all those statements, but it's kind of like you listen around and having Geraldine McCall explain to me how opportunities come to you standing on that, ambulance dock however many years ago. And then each one of these is all about relationships, right? If you think about it, every one of these opportunities, if you will, started with an individual. They didn't start with anything other than getting that relationship with someone that would be a mentor, would be a guide. And if people always ask what's the number one thing of advice, is you've got to remember it is all about relationships. All the rest of it is necessary, right? You have to have all the qualifications and all of that, but that's not sufficient. What gets you moving along is nurturing and building those relationships. And so that to me is kind of where we ended up.
Well, I think relationships, and one of the things when you were talking about working the two weekends, or the 2 days during the weekends, that Saturday, Sunday, going out with your friends Friday night, Saturday night. And I'm thinking, well, number one, we're always talking about those relationships, that mentoring and making those connections and taking care of each other, watching out for each other. But what I'm hearing from the doc is a little bit of hustle, because who'd have thought that some kid from Wilkes County who's schlepping, changing bedpans, and look at where you are. So what a long winding, strange trip sometimes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And you're right. I mean, it seems so trite. There's so many people that this quote has been accredited to. Luck favors the prepared mind. All of those different ways of thinking about it, but at the end of the day, there is a lot of hard work and hustle that is required. But if you like what you're doing, then it doesn't bother you.
For sure.
And so, I've never looked back and said, oh my God, I'm working really hard. I mean, and in retrospect, I guess if you counted the hours, that's probably true, but that's not the way, there's not the way it seemed at the time. It's not the way it seems now, right? It's doing what you want to do.
One of the things that stands out to me, and will stand out to the other guys, is we talk a lot about in EMS, specifically North Carolina, and how folks are promoted and what drives them to want to be there. I'm hearing a lot of motivation by positivity from you, and that's usually not the case we have found in North Carolina. Is they're usually motivated by negative action from a chief or a supervisor that says, hey, I want to be in that role because I didn't like the way they did it. And you have the reverse of that. This motivation about you to the point that you have a name. There's another person that does that, Michael Hubble, Dr.
Yep.
Hubble. He tells a story at every graduation ceremony I've been at about a positive impact that he had from someone. So that recurring theme of on that road to being great and successful, I think that that inspiration by positivity resonates. So to me, a message to folks is to be that positive influence to folks, because you don't know what you're going to spawn out of Wilkesboro. so that's good. One question I do have, we find ourselves teaching in our network with folks that are at the ground level, and part of what our network does is prepare them for the next level. They're a paramedic, they want to go into supervision, FTO, supervisor, something, every now and then straight to chief. That happens. What was it like to be a doc and knowing all of that clinical world? And then you said, hey, we'd like you to be the administrative chief. Now, I know what that looks like from a paramedic, and that can be, that's a 16-hour class, man, to get you prepared. But what was it for you?
Oh, that's fantastic. So there was a lot of on the job in a couple of ways. The first is the county was organized when I first got there. There was a Department of Public Safety, and then there was EMS, Fire Rescue, CCBI, Emergency Management as divisions under that larger department. When this opportunity came, the county realized that EMS was too big to be a division, and so they were going to elevate it to a department. So they were doing a whole reorg under the entire public safety side of the aisle. But for those first years, I had been involved in all of the budget process and a lot of the other opportunities. So I kind of knew how the budget worked. So that part was handy, right, to kind of know what you needed to do. The other one, though, is David Cook was the county manager at the time, and I asked him that exact question. I'm like, man, there's a lot going on here. And, because I was contracted with the county commission, but I worked for him, the org structure was weird, all of it was weird. He said, don't make it so hard. I said, all right, great. How do I make it easy? He said, the paramedics work for the citizens, and you work for the paramedics. As long as you keep that in mind, all the rest will take care of itself. And that actually became what I think is one of the biggest lessons that anybody can learn wherever you are in leadership, which is you are not going to be people's best friends. And so when I came in and said the citizen needs thus and so, and you did not provide it for the citizen, therefore you don't work for us anymore. Those were hard conversations, but then people would come to me and say, well, are you firing me? And I would say, absolutely not. You have fired yourself. I'm completing the paperwork. And it seems trite, but the defense of that so simple maneuver, right? Did you do the right thing for the citizen? Yes. Great. We'll defend you till the cows come home, right? If the hospital's mad because something happened or whatever, we've got you. But if you started your day not wanting to do the best thing for that citizen that needed you, then we've got a whole different conversation we're going to have. And it just became, to your point, not negative, but positive. It was, how can I get up today and take good care of the citizens? Because I know my management team has got me on the rest of it. I just have to take good care of the citizen that's in front of me. So that's one of those lessons learned where David Cook gave me that. And it was that it made, not that all decisions were easy, but it made them clear. It made the right thing easy to know. Didn't make it easy to do, but made it easy to know.
Right.
Well, I think one of the words that you used when we chatted about this before is sometimes having the stomach to do those things, because in the front end, it really sounds a lot servant leadership. I work for the paramedics, but having that stomach to, and sometimes some folks struggle with those tough conversations to say, hey, these are the expectations, and you're not meeting those expectations. So do you have any advice if that young leader is listening, how they have that tough conversation?
Absolutely. So I think that the two things to keep in mind, one of those is there's a phrase that often gets thrown around, particularly in public safety communities, the family of public, we're a family, right? People say that a lot. That may be true outside of work, but at work, the analogy I use is we're a team. Right, and the team is there to win. Win meaning we're taking good care of the community, and we're going to put our best players on the field. And my job, as in the analogy, right, as the pseudo coach, is at some points you're not ready to be on the team, and it may be temporary, right, or it may be permanent. We'll have those discussions. But I took working for the paramedics to mean the best of the paramedics in that field didn't want anyone less than them on the team with them, right? And so part of my job was to help mentor those that could get better to move them forward. And then I'll leave the team analogy alone after this, but in all joking aside, if you think about the NFL, there are some quarterbacks that left team A and went to team B and totally succeeded. And so it was not the perfect fit for them. And my guess is if you asked them, they would have wished their coach had moved them on a season earlier so they could have had success earlier. So you kind of take it as it should never be easy, right? If it's easy to ask somebody to move on or have discipline, then you don't have a heart, you're not thinking about this the right way. But if you take that step back and say, I'm here for the entire team, for everybody else, and right now, where we are today, we need to make a change. And that change could be, we're going to remediate for 6 months. That change could be, we may need you to go to look for success elsewhere. But you always do it in a professional way. You always do it in a coaching way, hoping for them to have success at their next place. So you don't make it to the point, this negative thing. Now, was I always perfect at that? No, right? I'm a human being, and some of these hit me emotionally or hit me in a way that I had to go take some time out. So there'll be some people at Wake EMS that said I didn't take my time out quick enough a couple of times. That's fair criticism, right? And I think that's the other piece for a leader is you are not going to be perfect at this every day. But you have to be humble enough to come back and say, you know what? I didn't set the best example yesterday, and I apologize. And this is how we're going to do this better going forward. And I did quite a bit of that, particularly early on, and learn my own lessons. But I think it's if it's a team concept and you treat people with honesty and respect, and you have a predictable cadence so that everybody knows where they stand, you go through the same process every time. That's what creates a sense of trust and ownership within an organization.
Yeah,
I like the way that you said that too, and like you said, everyone is not meant to be where they are, and sometimes you do have to encourage them to move along to something else and do it before it gets bad. And I think the people that are listening kind of need to hear that as well. Don't be negative, don't be terrible about it, but some people just are not the right fit at sometimes, and you got to be able to help guide them in a different direction. I had somebody used to say is we'll either help you with your career here, or we will career direct you somewhere else that can help you. And I think that's a good thing.
And there's many folks, that left Wake EMS in various circumstances that have had great success elsewhere. And likewise, we brought some people in that really did well at Wake. They just weren't in the right spot, where they were before. So I think that's a very valuable lesson. I'll get the name to you all. We can put it in, but in the Wall Street Journal today or over the weekend, they had the CEO of Xerox, and they asked her what the number one lesson that she would pass on to a new leader. And she said, do not hold on to people who are in the wrong seat too long. She just as clear. She said that was her number one lesson, like of all the things, so it's an interesting thing. And I think having been on the other side of that conversation also helped me, right? I mean, when I left Wake and they said, hey, this thing's closing down and we want you to succeed elsewhere, right? It kind of gives you the way to think about that. And in a lot of ways, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Yeah. And I think in leadership, a lot of that stuff is learned. You mentioned something about there's like this unwritten rule out there that sometimes to succeed somewhere, you have to leave that place and come back. There are several agencies like that. Like, you would be really good here, and I'm glad that you're here now, but you'll never be the chief here. You'll never be the director. You're going to have to go be successful somewhere else and then get hired back in there. We've seen that several times. And I was just thinking about your football analogy. And as soon as you said that, I thought of Michael Stafford and Jared Goff, the trade that happened with them. And it's like Stafford was great in Detroit. Goff was okay in LA, but when they traded out, their teams really exceeded. And I mean, they didn't change. They're the same quarterbacks they were. Sometimes the team has to change. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Terry, that's coming from the 1 European man.
I was expecting something about We Dem Boys, but anyways.
No, I'm gonna take about another 25 years off from the We Dem Boys thing. I do. I will say that in a time when data collection was not cool. I will say that Wake County had to make it cool, or maybe they made it cool for themselves, and it really shone the spotlight. So can you speak a little bit to what made you say, and I may be just talking out of turn because I don't know, but my assumption is that at Wake at some point in time, you said, we got to collect data, we got to show it's successful, we got to use research, and that's how we're going to determine what we're going to do. How much of that of what I just said is true, and how much of it is false?
It's all true, and I would love to take credit for it, which would be untrue. But I'll tell you a story of what changed the way we did that. There was something I wanted to change, and for the life of me today, I don't remember what it was, but there was something they were doing, and I wanted to do it some other way. And it was going to cost a little bit of money, so I had to go present to the county commission. And so I got my slide deck all together, and this was one of my first presentations, and I'd been out of fellowship 6 months, And so I started giving the presentation, and I said, and this particular study has a p-value, and I went in to try to describe to the county commission exactly what the p-value was, right? And the little light came on from the chair, like their microphone had turned on,
Right.
And so I paused, and the chair said, Dr. Myers, everybody on this dais has a postgraduate degree. We're well aware of what a p-value is. If you could just get on with it, we would appreciate it. And I thought, okay, I'm in a different spot. And so, that's one of those regroup quick, right? Got through that presentation, and I went back and I said, okay, in this community, for this county commission, and for all the ones that came after, to be quite honest, you have to have it together. You have to know your data forwards and backwards. You have to know what the possible impact is going to be, how you're going to report out that impact. And so we went back, and the other thing that we did, and this I will take some credit for, is we were doing education at the individual agency level, just like I had done it at Orange County EMS in the upstairs of the bay on every odd Thursday, out of whatever the annual text was. There was no local education to speak of as far as getting off the national curriculum, at least not consistently. I'm not saying there was none, but it was not consistent. It wasn't good throughout all the agencies. And so it was an unpopular thing, but we moved to unified paid education. So if you were on the Nightdale Rescue Squad, Wake EMS, Cary EMS, it didn't matter. You were in the same room getting the same education, and it was all locally driven. And those two things, the ability to give the same message to all the providers, and then the next month for them to see the data from the previous, whatever thing we were studying, that I think those two things were really key. Because otherwise it was, I just want to get my re-credential and then I'm going to work on that ambulance.
Yeah.
Right. But when you put it together and it became what the work I'm doing on that ambulance is informing the education to get my re-credential, it changed a lot of the mindsets around that. And that didn't happen overnight, but it happened more quickly than I thought it would. So it was those two things. It was county commission expecting that level of data and us getting people in the same room. Back to the thing we talked about at the very beginning, it's all relationships.
And you were delivering the message, right? Like you were the one in the room.
I did a lot of it. And then we got the EMS fellows to do it. I'll tell you a little sidelight that I won't tell you which fellow it was, but one of them decided to come give the clotting cascade and went through every way that the 2 to 8, all that. I can't draw that stuff anymore, but and I mean, that joke is still at Wake EMS. If y'all don't behave, we're going to go over the clotting cascade for the next hour. But yeah, it was physician led, but it also had case review. We got to the point where individuals could talk about their own case that may be a learning opportunity without it being negative or punitive. And that's when I knew we'd kind of hit a level of maturity. And that took some time, right? You got to have faith in everybody around and that kind of thing. And then, since I've left, they've taken all the education in-house from EMT to paramedic.
Right.
And then of course, all of your post education, but that to me is, if there's one thing that I would say helped change the system, it was that.
So let me just take a quick left turn before we keep going down the road here. And I was talking with somebody, they were doing a PhD thesis, and we got on the subject and where you had used that word punitive. Sometimes when we do our call reviews, folks can view it as punitive, or sometimes whether it's the view as the paramedic, or maybe it's the view of the administration, it's a negative. What's some advice that you would say, or how did you right that ship? How did you turn things around to take it from being that negative and turning it into that positive?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think the first thing that we did is we did not start with the individual presenting their case, right? The first time we did all of this, they were totally anonymized, and we went to a great deal of effort because, as you know, if you have certain things in the narrative, everybody knows, oh, that's how Joe or Jen starts her narrative, and they could back into who it was, right? So we did quite a bit of focus on making sure they were anonymized. And then what we did is guided people through a structured review process. Were they within the standard? Was this outcome predictable? You know, all of that. And then and only then did we say, do you feel comfortable raising your hand and acknowledging it's your case? We were still presenting it, and they would just raise their hand in the room. And once that started happening regularly, then it became pretty normal, if you will, for either the person to present their case, or for them very, very quickly within the things, hey, that was mine, let me tell you what that was all about. And that was always voluntary, whether you want to present it yourself or raise your hand. We never required that, but it became more common than not for somebody to say, yeah, that was mine, and let me tell you why it turned out that way. Great question. But yeah, I think you've got to start with it anonymized to let people get comfortable with how we're going to talk about things, and not let it get down a path even when it's anonymous, right? Because then people never want to come forward, right? We've got to get it into a professional structured format.
If you ran EMS in the whole US and you had the complete control over that, what would be one thing you'd modify?
The most important thing, I think, is, and I'm going to cheat and make it a two-part answer, but they are related, is demonstrating the value to the health system, which would then get the compensation aligned with the value that's provided. And I think, and it's a complex thing, but I'll give you my maybe 2-minute version of why it is the way that it is, right? We are in the Department of Transportation federally for historical reasons, but as a consequence, we are seen as a supplier of healthcare and not a provider of healthcare. And that's semantic, except suppliers of healthcare get paid a fixed rate no matter what they do. And that's where we are. And that's why ALS2 gets ALS2, whether you do one thing or, well, 3 or more things, right? Well,
Right.
Whatever that count is. But what that has not allowed is us to say 10% of the population calls EMS every year. What that EMT or paramedic or dispatcher, for that matter, decides to do with that patient changes your downstream expenditure, experience, and everything else exponentially. And if anybody else had that level of decision making, right, then there would be a much more informed decision tree, and there would be much more appropriate levels of compensation to make those decisions because of the downstream impact. So one example, I'll give you 2 quick examples. One example, we say that 10% number. That's not right. As in point of fact, 81% of the people call an ambulance once a year, but that's 56% of the volume. Right? Said another way, 44% of the time you're going to somebody that's already called EMS once this year. And we need to figure out a way to help those people get the right care. They're calling because they don't have any other choice. I'm not blaming the patient one iota. There's a very, very few that are actually just being evil and nefarious about it. But most of them are calling us because they don't have another way into healthcare. And we ought to do something about that. And as we do that, their trips to the emergency department go down. We provide value to the healthcare system, and they get better, more sustained preventative care, all of those things. The other unique part of EMS is taking care of our acute patients with the best therapy is also the cheapest therapy. So it's not like cancer, right? If you have cancer, sometimes that brand new chemotherapy agent is all the money in the world. In our case, take a stroke. If I get that stroke to the right place to start with and make the patient better, give them the best possible care that we could provide, that is also long-term for the healthcare system, the cheapest thing we can do, because they're not going to be in long-term care. They're not going to need bedside assistance. So the patient does better, the number one reason we do anything, but it also improves the economics for the healthcare system. So I would figure out a way to get the model up high enough so that the people that make the decisions see the impact here and we change the way we do it. So all the other stuff I think falls from that, but we've got to get the value proposition signed up the right way for the non-acute and for the acute. So it's a long-winded answer, but that's what I would do.
I agree. I think we struggle with finding where that platform is to do it. Like who's holding the bullhorn, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that's one of the great parts of this work is it is where public health and public safety come together. One of the hardest parts of this work is you have to speak to both camps. And the messaging is not going to be the same for the two. And so it is hard to get that unified message going forward. Although I think as we get better data, as we can demonstrate our outcomes better, we'll have an opportunity to say that more at a national level soon.
Dr. Myers, as we are starting to wind up a little bit, I got a question. Where does AI fit in EMS?
That is a fantastic question.
I'm an AI guy, I like AI, so.
Yeah, no. And come to Greensboro. We've got a whole talk coming on this at NCMS Expo. But just to give you the teaser of it, and this is the delicate part, right? If you think about a community, now this will be my one example of why I think AI is helpful. If you think about a community and we all sat in the room and we had daylight and plenty of time, and I put up on the screen the patient having sepsis as an example, and we all looked at it, every paramedic in the room, everybody else, we would identify that septic patient because of the common experience and knowledge of everybody in that room. But when I send a singular paramedic at 3 a.m. to Betty's bedside, they haven't seen a septic patient as an individual in months or a year or ever, right? What AI does philosophically for me is it gives us the opportunity to bring that common knowledge to the bedside for that individual paramedic at 3 a.m. for a patient they've never seen before, a patient type they've never seen before. It's not generating new knowledge. That's coming, right? That's neural networks. That's all of that stuff. That makes us all nervous, right? I'm not sure I'm ready to just let that go free and come back and tell me the best treatment for sepsis.
Correct.
But we know today how to identify sepsis collectively. We just don't have it at the bedside. So bedside decision support is one of those things. And again, it's just like everything. It's you're taking away my paramedic card. It's like when we told you don't intubate everybody in cardiac arrest. Well, that's what makes me a paramedic. No, them living is what makes you a paramedic, not putting a tube in their throat. And so it's the same thing. It's going to take a little bit of we're not taking away your independent practice as a paramedic. We're giving you the benefit of the experience of all of your colleagues right now at the bedside. To me, that's where it really comes in. Secondarily, it comes in education because you can have individualized tutoring for that student right now, meet them where they are and move them forward. And I think that's underutilized. And that doesn't really require anything other than, hey, go ask ChatGPT about this and they'll quiz you until you get where you need to be and you'll learn something. So I think those are the two broad brushes, but I could go on all day. But I do think that we need to get ready in initial and ongoing education so that people don't see it as the great evil, but also know what its limits are so they don't end up far afield, which you could do.
Correct. And and I tell students today, we take and there's, I don't know, 90 chapters in the paramedic book. Well, we give you about this much information on everything in that book. We give you a paragraph on everything. So we teach you just this little teeny bit, in hopes that I said, think about an emergency room doctor. They're getting that same little bit of information. They're just getting on a little bit of different scheme. But don't think when somebody presents to the ED with something crazy, they don't go back there to Google and go blah, 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 and try to figure out what it is, because we have it. We can't teach you everything. So I think that's a great analogy of that is, using that AI as that resource. I agree with that. Just it'll be interesting to see how we progress through that. Very new information to us. Everybody's a little scared of it. So we're like, what do we do? What do we don't do? How do we, and the college world is, how do we let students use it? Do we let students not use it? How do we make it so students can? How do we make it so students can't? And it's, becoming hard to block it and or to not let students, but then it's hard to let students do it as well. So it's a little hard.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that train's left the station. One of the things when we're reviewing articles and submitting research now, you have to affirm either I didn't or I did and I reviewed it and used it responsibly.
Right.
So and that last sentence is in the past 12 months. So I think, a year from now, this conversation is going to be so dramatically different. One of the things that's held us up has been cost. And it's still going to cost a lot. And there still are data farms that are considering, no joke, considering consolidating and having a nuclear reactor to power them just for these data farms because it takes so much energy to run these things. That has become the rate limiter in a lot of ways right now. And, whether this deep sea out of China is going to get us, was it really faster and cheaper, or was that just smoke and mirrors? We've got to sort all that out. But I see a big change in the next 12 months, probably.
And speaking of that change, when I was in Fort Worth for the Texas EMS conference, there was a booth over on the far wall. I don't know if you got a chance to chat with these folks, Project Skylar, and my very dirty description of them is ChatGPT for EMS, to where you can ask Project Skylar, hey, I'm responding to a 35 or a 35 kilogram patient that's having a seizure, or even say the age, and it'll give you an ideal weight for that patient with the age. And then it captures all of that stuff, and kind of starting to go back to some of the things we talked about. You can QI that report, upload and attach that to your PCR, and even have Project Skylar create a quiz for you off of that patient to say, hey, if you were doing a case presentation, what would be the things that you talk about it? I think they said they've got 2 agencies in Texas. They're working with DFW Airport to get them on board. And so I think the next 12 months, you heard it here first from the doc, is going to really change the game.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that coming for sure.
Well, a year ago, looking to today, it looked different too. So, when you're forecasting things for a year, what ChatGPT was a year ago, if it even existed, it might have been in its infancy, to see what it is now. And that's just one form of AI. So, it's where the world will be. I will just say this, Brent, if you're in the market for a best friend, just keep me in mind. That's what I would say.
At least they didn't ask you who your best friend was. They normally throw people in that trap. They want to pinpoint them down to, who your best friend is. So at least
since Walter brought it up, Doc, and I guess final question.
Don't fall.
Chat GPT and AI can do a lot of things for a person. It can help you out. I've used Chat GPT to strategize some things, but it doesn't replace a best friend. So if you had to say who your best friend is, who's the doc's best friend?
Wow. I don't know that I'm going to commit to this.
Don't. Yeah, you'll get in trouble. Don't.
Yeah. This is a no-win situation, sir.
I wouldn't want to embarrass us either. Knowing that me and you are friends like that would just make them want more. So it's probably cool not to mention it.